Welcome to a brand new series in the restoration industry. Gokul and I are launching a restoration masterclass, and this one is going to be on mergers and acquisitions. I am very excited to have Gokul here as the resident M&A expert. This is a huge topic in the restoration industry right now, and it seems like every week, almost daily, there are new announcements coming out about mergers and acquisitions that are happening with really big companies and really big players. So over the coming weeks and months, Gokul and I are going to be releasing a number of conversations on everything that has to do with M&A. Any questions that you might have if you are approached to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling your company, just really everything you're going to need to know. So stay tuned for a lot of episodes to come. All right, so we're here to give some background on M&A in the restoration industry right now. There has been so many mergers and acquisitions. Even at the end of 2021, it was like new press releases were coming into my inbox almost every single day. I couldn't keep up, right? Yeah. So share a little bit about that trend. Why has M&A been such a big trend in recent years in the restoration industry?
So I think the biggest trend is, I think the whole world is discovering restoration, correct? And our industry has been a fragmented industry historically, right? And that makes it ripe for consolidation. So you got both of those forces that are put together, and it's just accelerating everything in our industry at the moment. Yeah.
So who is buying and selling companies? Is it a lot of private equity? Is it a lot of the big companies like the ATIs and the BMS Cats and the First Onsites? Is it a mix of both?
Yeah, so you got three different buyers, right? So you got companies that are in restoration that are now trying to help national platforms. They're great buyers because they're already in the industry and they know how to acquire and how to grow. Then you got the private equity folks that are coming into the industry and saying, hey, I want to build a national platform, right? And then you also have some family offices and high net worth individuals that are kind of reading about the big acquisitions and saying, hey, I want in. All right. So you got all of these players trying to get into it. And that just adds more fuel to the fire.
Yes. Okay. So we know why people are buying. Why are people selling? I know there's some generational leadership change. I know there's burnout. So why are people selling right now?
So, there's a lot of baby boomers in our industry, correct? Yeah. And I think the youngest baby boomer is around 65, 66, if I do math on top of my head. Right? So I think it's time for them to retire. And I think they're cashing in on this trend of M&A. Yep. And rightfully so. They've owned their companies for 15, 20, 30 years, and they should be rewarded for their hard work. Yeah.
So do you think that this trend's going to continue? Do you think it's going to phase out anytime soon?
Well, beyond 2 years, nobody knows.
Yes.
But here at our firm, I think for the next 2 years, it's going to continue. Right? There's a lot of sellers wanting to exit. There's a lot of opportunities for companies to build national platforms. And I think that's going to stay in momentum for another 12 to 24 months for sure. And beyond that, we don't know yet.
We don't know yet. All right. So something that I hear all the time in the industry is, I am so tired of talking about M&A. Can we stop talking about this? I'm not selling. I don't care. But people do need to pay attention. Whether you plan to buy or sell or not, you need to understand what's happening in the industry and why. So what would you tell somebody that's like, I'm tired of talking about this?
So people run their companies for different reasons. But I think as an entrepreneur, okay, building a company that you can cash in on and have an exit, okay, is the pinnacle of your career. And I think if you don't prepare for it, you're leaving a lot of money on your table, okay, for your family and for yourself. So I think, when you start to run a business, you always have to have an exit in mind, because at some point you're going to exit your business.
Yes.
Right? So the sooner you start, the better you can build that value.
Yes. Agreed. Thanks for watching. Welcome to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. This time we're going to talk a little bit about the stages of business, and the better we understand those stages, the better we can understand where M&A comes in the business. So Gokul, I'm going to toss it right over to you. Start by outlining what those different stages are of a business.
Yeah. So every business goes through these stages, right? So you start off on a startup stage, and that's when you're perhaps a one-man truck or a two-man truck starting out of your driveway or 1,000 square foot warehouse, right? And then you slowly start to build your business, and you get into this early stage growth, right? You're starting to add technicians, maybe there's an office person, they're helping you. Then you get into an accelerated stage growth. And then at some point your business plateaus, correct? And then it declines. Okay, so when it plateaus, you either re-engineer and reinvent yourself and you get back growing it again, or if it plateaus for a long time, it's going to start to decline. So as an entrepreneur, it's really important to know where you are in this cycle, right? Because when you're in this accelerated growth stage, your business is worth 3 to 4 times more than when you are in the declining stage or when you're in the startup stage, right? So the value of your business actually changes as you go across that curve. So it's really important to know where you are on that stage of growth.
So you hinted to it a little bit already, but where on the curve is that ideal place to sell?
So it's the place where you think nothing can go wrong in your business.
Okay. All right.
Okay, the place where you say, why would I want to sell it, is when your business is worth the most.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yes.
Because you're clicking on all cylinders at that point, right? Your sales is growing, profits are growing, your team is growing. That's when someone's going to pay you a lot of money for it, right? Yeah. So in our office, most people call us. 8 out of 10 calls come when the business is on the declining stage. Okay. So they've just stayed in the business a lot longer than they should, right? So when you're accelerating and when you're growing is really when your business is worth most to a buyer.
So what if you're in that plateau stage? What does that look like if you're hoping to kind of sell, but you've been plateaued for a minute?
Yeah, plateauing is okay as long as it hasn't been done for decades.
Okay.
Correct?
Yes.
But it's not worth as much as in the accelerated phase.
Okay.
Correct?
Yep.
So plateau is okay, but you don't want to sell it when you're declining and when you're completely burnt out and you've been burnt out for 10 years and now you're saying, I have a headache and then I want to give it to somebody else. No one's going to pay you for it.
So,
right?
Yes. So if you're on the decline, what can you do to help get back up there? I know that you have helped companies that are in that place to increase what the company is worth and get back on the right track.
So a lot of our business is consulting with our clients.
Okay.
Correct? We consult with clients for years sometimes before they get ready for sale. So when they're in the declining phase, right, we just need to get re-energized and refocused. And we need to put maybe a 2-year plan or a 3-year plan to get that business back up again to where it's sellable. It can be done. We do it all the time. It just takes a little bit of focus and getting re-energized about your business. And a lot of times going back to the roots of why you started it. You almost have to become a startup entrepreneur again. But it can be done. There's technologies, there's strategies in which we can do it. And we've achieved it for our clients quite a lot.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gokul.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for more. Welcome to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. We are continuing to kind of lay the groundwork for this entire masterclass series, right? And so this time, Gokul, I want to start off with the question of why do people want to sell?
So, there's a host of reasons, right? From burnout to maybe my kids don't want it, maybe some key people left, or maybe there's a big player that came into your market. But let me tell you my own experience, right? As you know, I run other companies. Yes. It's an addiction for me, basically, right? But I just sold a company about 4 months ago. Okay. And, a year before that, I knew it in my gut. It was a gut check moment, right? I knew that I wasn't a good shepherd for my employees anymore because I didn't want to grow anymore. I was good. I was happy, right? I wasn't a good shepherd for my customers, right? And I knew that. And that feeling kept on growing and growing inside of me. And I finally pulled the trigger, right? And I said, okay, I'm going to put it on the market and I'm going to exit. And it was a bittersweet moment because now that business is growing and it's better for the employees and the customer. It's got a motivated owner, right? So that's what I think, like from a personal experience, that's what it is. It's a gut check moment. And I think most entrepreneurs know it, right? If you're not, if you look in the mirror and you say, I'm not 100% committed to being a great shepherd of this company and moving it forward and giving my employees all the opportunities they want. To grow in their careers and absolutely being committed to my customers, correct? And if you've lost that loving feeling on all of that, then you know that it's time for you to exit. I think to me, from my own personal story, that's when I really knew. And I knew it a year before I really pulled the trigger. It took me a year to just get in terms with it, right? And I finally had to be really honest with myself. So I think that would be the number one reason is I think you just have to have a gut check moment and say, if I'm not 100% committed, then let's get somebody else there that can move this thing along.
So going past that leadership and shepherding conversation, are there other factors that weigh into that where you just know if you kind of see this happening in your business, maybe it's time to sell?
If you're not skipping to work every day, business on a burnout, especially in our industry, which is 24/7, correct? And entrepreneurs are fighting so many forces every single day, correct? And here's an interesting fact. Do you know that most companies sell every 9 years? right? Yeah, a lot of people don't know it. You think as an entrepreneur, you got to keep this thing forever for 30 years, etc. But if you're not absolutely motivated to get to work, it's probably time to get out.
Thank you,
Right?
Gokul.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Stay tuned for more. Welcome to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. We're here to talk about another really important topic related to all this that's kind of like the groundwork of your M&A strategy, right? It's exit planning. Everybody needs an exit plan, right? But when in a business should you have an exit strategy in place?
Great question. So the best thing you can do for yourself and your family is to have an exit plan on day one. You got to know what success looks like, whether it's 10 years from now or 15 years from now, or you're mid-career and maybe you're 20 years out from retirement. Whatever that end goal is, the best thing you can do is have a picture of what success looks like for you and your family and your business, right? Without that, you just have a job. Yep. You're really not running a business, right? So I would recommend to all the folks that are listening to this or watching this, right? Just figure out what the end game looks like. And then you can take meaningful steps to get there, right? Otherwise, we talk to so many entrepreneurs who they have a job, they got nothing to sell. They're working 80 hours, 90 hours, taking calls, going to fires in the middle of the night. I mean, why would you go through all this trouble if you can't cash out on the end, right? So I will highly recommend day one. And if you're not day one, you're running your company for 10 years now and you're listening to this, do it today, right? Just figure out what the end game looks like. And it's different for everybody.
Sure.
Right? For some people, it's a financial number. For some people, it's taking care of friends and family. For some people, it is taking care of the employees and making sure they're set up for future growth. It doesn't matter what it is. You got to have a clear picture. Okay? Otherwise, you're kind of in the middle of the ocean drifting with no direction at all. Yes?
So how formal is an exit plan? Is it something that's on paper or it's something that's in your head?
See, it runs the whole gamut. So I'm not one that says you got to have this 40-page plan that you're never going to look at. That's not my game, right? It doesn't matter. It can be on your phone. Okay. It could be a couple of notes that says, okay, 5 years from now, this is what success looks like for me, or this is what the business means to me and my family, and this is what it needs to do. This is when I get out. Correct? This is what I'm not willing to give up for business growth. Yep. Correct? I don't know what that is. I mean, it could be on a piece of paper. Sure. I mean, I tell you, I don't have personally a huge business, exit plan, even though I preach it almost every day. Yep. But I do have a plan. I do have a precise idea of what the end game looks like. It's on a little board sitting in my office. Okay. Yes? Yep. So yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated, but it has to be well thought of and meaningful to the owner. Yeah, that's the most important.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Gokul.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stay tuned.
Absolutely.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. Today, we are going to start talking about the 6 drivers to increase the value of your business. And we're actually going to break this up into a couple episodes because this is a really, really important topic. So Gokul, let's outline the first 3 or maybe all 6, and then the first 3 we're going to talk about of these drivers.
Yeah, sure. So let me tell you first of all how we came up with this. Right? So at our firm, we've done about 370 plus transactions. And what we did was we went back and started analyzing them. And the ones that got a lot of interest from buyers and got multiple offers all had certain things in common. And they had these 6 value drivers. And let's talk about the first 3, right? Financials. Okay, this is what buyers are going to look for. So you got to have great financials. Okay, if you got to explain your financials to somebody, then you're probably not where you want to be. Yep. Okay, so you got to have true cash, true accrual. You got to be following all of the accounting principles, etc. Most buyers are going to want about 5 years of financial data. You can get away with 3, but most of them are going to want 5. Okay, the second one is growth potential. Like we said, when we talked about the different stages of growth. Okay, your business is worth more to a buyer if it's growing. Sure. Okay, or even if it's stable, it's okay. Okay, but not when it's declining. When it's declining, it becomes an unsellable business. Okay, so growth. And how do you grow and how do you articulate that growth? And how do you communicate that to a buyer, right? Do you have a business plan? Do you have a growth plan? Do you have a business development path, right? So how do you communicate that? So the more you communicate that, the more your business is worth, right? Sure. Then let's talk about this one that a lot of people are not talking about, which is called quality of earnings. Oh. Okay? And it's just a really fancy word for saying how diversified is your revenue streams, right? And if a buyer buys your business, is that revenue stream going to continue post-closing? All right, so if you're getting 50% of your business from one source, your quality of earnings is going to be low.
Got it.
Correct? Yep. If you have 20 different sources where you're getting revenues, right? Maybe it's your internet, maybe it's your sales team, maybe it's TPAs, maybe it's adjusters, or maybe it's property manager. If it's well diversified, the quality of your earnings is high. Correct? Yep. And if the quality of your earnings is high and more diversified, it's worth a lot more to a buyer, right? Yep. So those are your first three. Yep. Okay.
So I want to go back to the first part about the financials a little bit, because I know you and you're passionate about numbers and money and stuff, and we've talked about accounting and restoration before. And are restorers good with accounting? Are most of their accountants, do they have good numbers and financials to provide? Are there some areas that you see that could improve, that would help people going to sell?
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer in staying in your lane and staying in your circle of competence. Sure. Correct?
Yes.
So it's really good to have somebody that knows accounting. And when you're trying to exit your business, and even if you don't exit your business, okay, accounting is the language of business. And if you don't get that right, you don't understand the business at all. So it's highly critical, even if you have no intentions of exiting your business, okay, you got to get the accounting right, because when you're looking at that data, it's got to be valid and it's got to be true and it's got to mean something to you. Okay. Correct? Yes. So I always recommend getting help. Okay. To do it.
All right. So the next three drivers are to come. Thank you, Gokul, for that. Stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass on M&A. Today, we're continuing a conversation that we started in our last episode, talking about the 6 drivers of value for a restoration company when you're talking about selling. So the first 3 that you talked about were the financials, potential growth, and the quality of the earnings in the company, right? Right. Okay, so let's dive into the second 3. What are the second 3 of those 6 drivers?
So, success leaves clues, right? That's what we talked about in the previous episode. And so all great companies that are sellable have these 6 factors in them, right? So we talked about the first 3. Let's talk about the last 3 of that, right? So documenting your marketing program and your sales program. Yep. Most buyers want to know that what you're done now is going to continue post-closing. So if you can document it and show it to a potential party that, hey, here's our plan, here's how we execute it, here are the KPIs, here are the metrics, okay? The buyer, your buyer will pay you infinitely more for your business, correct? So here's a new one that's been coming up is Net Promoter Score, okay? So which basically is different from just testimonials, okay? Net Promoter Score is how likely are your customers, okay, going to refer you to somebody that they know, correct? So if you have a high Net Promoter Score, and if you can demonstrate that, okay, it's worth a lot more to your buyers. Your business is worth a lot more. Okay, now it's a pretty new thing in our industry. Now, Net Promoter Score has been around for a long time, but I would highly recommend people, if they don't have a process that collects Net Promoter Scores in every job, is to implement one, right? So there's a lot of softwares and things that can automate a lot of this. It's not a lot of block and tackle. It doesn't take a lot of resources out of your team, right? But having a Net Promoter Score absolutely tells you how well you're doing from the eyes of your customer. And if you can demonstrate a high Net Promoter Score, your business is worth a lot more to a buyer, correct? Yes. Now, and then let's get into teamwork and culture. Now, another topic that not a lot of people in the industry like to talk about, correct? But let me tell you from a buyer's point of view, all right? You must have a good bench strength, okay? No national buyer wants to buy a company to run it, okay? They want somebody that can take your place and run their branch or run the office for them, correct? So having bench strength absolutely matters to a buyer. And culture, okay? If you have high turnover, your business is worth less, okay? If people are unhappy and they're leaving, it's worth less to a buyer. If you have low turnover and the culture is great and you've spent time and effort and the importance and the focus of building a great culture for your team, okay, buyers will pay up for it, right? So those are the 6 clues or the 6 factors, okay, that where companies that have them, are much more attractive to a buyer than companies that don't have them.
So I want to ask a little bit more about bench strength.
Yeah.
A potential buyer, how are they establishing or evaluating the bench strength of a company? How do you know?
So they ask for two things. It starts off with, hey, can I have an org chart with 10 years
10 years.
and pay? So it starts there,
a lot.
correct? Yep. And then every buyer is going to ask you this question, okay? Who's your number 2 person and your number 3 person? Who are your key people, and I want to interview them. Correct? And a lot of times they'll interview them before we close on the business. Usually it's done about a week or two, somewhere in there before we close on the business. So they want to talk to your key personnel. Okay? And so that conversation is probably one of the most important conversations, on your path to an exit. Yep. Okay, if that conversations go well and there's team culture there and the key people are happy and they're tenured, then it's worth more to a buyer. But if they smell trouble in that meeting, then they may even back out. Okay, so that's where this is all coming from. I think we need to pay a lot more attention to the team that we have and the culture that we're developing in our companies.
Perfect. Thank you, Gokul.
Yeah.
I can think of some companies off the top of my head right now who have some big bench strength that just had some big sales. So that's perfect information.
Oh, yes. In the buyer's world, it's called talent acquisition. Again, that's the word. So a lot of times it's beyond the numbers. Yeah. If you got a great team, okay, they will buy it because of the team. Okay? And that's starting to happen a lot now, especially in this environment.
Yes, there are some really tough markets, right? So going into that a little bit further, this episode's going to be a little longer. Sorry, guys. Yeah. But how many companies have you seen, would you say, that are starting to buy for that talent piece? It's so impossible to find people right now, no matter what. So what does that look like? So
talent acquisition and talent audit is what they call it, where they look at what your team looks like. Next to your financials and the profit of the company is the most important thing that a buyer's looking at the moment. And I think it's going to continue to be. So here are the top 3 that they're looking at out of the 6. Your financials, right? The trends. Yep. Next, they're going to look at your bench strength or your team and the culture. Next, they're going to look at your net promoter score or your reputation. Okay, those are your top 3. If you're going to pick 3 out of the 6, that will be my top 3, right? And talent acquisition is becoming huge in our industry right now. Perfect. Yes.
Thank you, Gokul.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the Restoration Masterclass on M&A. So today we're going to dive a little bit more into a topic that's been teased in several of the other episodes that we've done, and we're talking about sellable versus unsellable businesses. So Gokul, let's first talk about what an unsellable business looks like.
Yeah, sure. So we've done a ton of research in our firm, and success leaves clues, correct? Yep. And all successful companies have some factors in common. Okay, they got great books. Okay, they got diversified revenue streams. They got a growth potential in the sense they're not declining, correct? Yep. They got documented marketing and sales plans, all right? They got a great net promoter score, okay, or a great reputation, and they got a great team behind them. Okay, now for you to get multiple offers and get great outcomes and top dollar for your business, you gotta have all 6. Okay? Yep. Companies that are not sellable don't have them. Okay, so there's a lot of those 6 factors that are broken, correct? So the path to making your company sellable is very clear. Okay, there's a definite path. If you have these 6 factors, and you're not going to be good at all 6, okay, but even if I grade you, if you get a C+ in all of these 6 factors, correct? You're a sellable company. Okay, but here's the astonishing fact. Okay, 80% of the companies that call us and entrepreneurs that call us, their companies are unsellable. In the sense, they get an F. Okay, they're not even a C+. And I'll tell you why this happens. Because the technologies and the strategies that you use to run a business day to day are completely different than the strategies you're going to use to sell a business. Makes sense? Yes. So day to day, you're just looking at bank accounts. You're looking at, I got to get this job done, that job done. I got to build get my AR under control. These are the things that we all think about. Correct? Yep. It's a strategy. And if you're running a company, it works. Yep. But when you're trying to sell your company, it's a completely different game plan. Yes. It's a completely different ball game. So you cannot run your company as if you're operating it all the time.
All right, so going back to that stat that you gave, that 80% of the companies that call you are unsellable. On average, how long does it take those companies that decide, well, I do want to sell? How long does it take them to get from that unsellable stage to being sellable?
Yeah, so it depends, but the shortest we've done it is about a year. But if I had a wish list, I would love to have 2 to 3 years out. Okay, I can give you examples after examples where we've doubled the valuation of companies from 3 million to 6 million, from 4 million to 8 million, from 6 million to 12 million in 2 to 3 years by kind of implementing some of these strategies, by implementing some of these technologies in there, and really focusing on what is it a buyer is going to look for. Now, a lot of people are very familiar, like when they sell a house. Correct? It's in our normal DNA. Everybody's used to it, right? So they can, they'll paint, they'll do some curb appeal, they'll take out all the pictures. We know all these things.
Yes.
It's very similar to when you're trying to sell a business.
Okay.
Correct?
Yeah.
So the way you operate it is not how you sell it.
Okay. Yeah.
Correct? So they're completely different. So you kind of have to do a little bit of, not curb appeal, but you kind of have to make a few adjustments to your strategies, few adjustments to your technologies and how you present it and what you kind of implement into your program. And then when you present it to a buyer, it's like a breath of fresh air for them. And they'll be like, oh, this is great, right? Yeah.
So what happens when a buyer who's kind of in that burnout stage is approaching you and they're like, 2 to 3 years? How much work is that in 2 to 3 years? How do you help them kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel and realize that these few years of work really will help you with your exit strategy in the end?
Yeah. So it's all about getting the second wind. Correct? And here's what we found in our firm, right? So when people call us, sometimes they're burnt out or they should have exited 5 years ago. They're kind of maybe stayed in the game too long, okay? But if we give them a short 12-month or a 24-month horizon, there's an end game there. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And what we find is we get much better results when there's an end game in there, right? Again, it comes back to knowing what success looks like and then working towards it.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Gokul. Stay tuned for more. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. Today we're going to talk about a big topic in the restoration industry, kind of unfortunately, but hopefully this conversation can help some people overcome this issue. And we're talking about burnout. So Gokul, out of the reasons that people come to you to sell, how high is burnout on that list?
Number one by a mile. Okay. Yeah.
So what does it look like when an owner is burned out, and what are some steps that they can take? Is it too late if they're burned out to sell?
Burnout is a symptom, okay, usually of overworking and not having clarity, correct? So let's look at people that are not burnt out. So maybe we can learn from them, right? Yep. So what we find in our firm is owners that have a plan and that understand what success means to them, and understand what business means to them in their personal life, and have an exit plan and know what the end game looks like. Okay, what we find in our firm is those folks are less burnt out. Okay, so the people that call us with the burnt out, kind of they have a sense and a feeling of, I can't get away from it. It's going to go on every day. And that's just from not planning and not having a clear picture of what that business means to me, what exit looks like, what it looks like a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, correct? Yep. And what we find is entrepreneurs and owners that have a plan and have a great idea of what success looks like are less likely to get burnt out. Okay. But it is a huge topic in our industry that people need to talk about. Absolutely it is, you know?
Do you see owners get kind of revitalized when they come to you and talk about this? Like, as you're helping them plan and strategize, like maybe they get that passion for their business back?
It's more than just passion. Okay, I think passion is great, and I know we talk about it a lot. Yeah. But I'm not kind of like this rah-rah kind of person. I like more strategy and methodical ways of doing things. Okay, and let me tell you why burnout happens, at least from my perspective. Correct. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're really great in rainmaking. You're a rainmaker. You're really good at sales. Correct? When you're in a startup phase, that skill is going to serve you really well. Okay? You got a team of 2 or 3 people. Okay, now let's just say you're doing 10 million in revenue. You're not selling anymore. Now you're a HR person. You're a team builder. Yeah. You are a architect. You're playing different roles, and you don't have the tools to play that role as your company grows. Okay, that's when burnouts happen, is when your tools and your skill sets don't match the stage of the company in which you're in, and you're doing something that you're not meant to be doing. You're doing something that you're not made to do.
Yep.
Okay, those are the entrepreneurs that get absolutely fried.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, so all entrepreneurs go through different stages, and as your company grows, the role in your company changes.
Yep.
It goes from being a rainmaker to now you got to become scale. Then you become a systemizer. You got to be really good at making systems and processes. Then you're going to be a team builder. Then you're going to be a cheerleader, and then you're going to be an architect. So those are the roles that an entrepreneur plays as the companies progress. And so you have to constantly retool and retool and retool. And if you don't want to retool, that's okay. Then that's a sign you got to exit. Or you hire someone with those skills. Yeah. But when someone is in a role that they're not meant to play, that's usually when burnout happens. Okay. Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, that was a lot of great leadership, wisdom, and advice as well. So maybe that's a future masterclass coming soon.
Yes, we can do that. Absolutely.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. Today we're talking about something that will hopefully normalize the process of selling for owners, right? We're talking about the emotions behind selling, and there are a slew of emotions that I'm sure you could be feeling as an owner thinking about selling your business, right? So let's dive into a few of the top emotions that you see owners approach.
Yeah, so this is a really fun, interesting topic, right? Yep. So when I wrote that article for you a couple of months back, I got so many phone calls. Oh my gosh, this is exactly what's going on in my mind, right? So it's really, because most entrepreneurs are passionate about their business, and wanting to sell their business. You go through this whole kind of spectrum of emotions, correct? And let me tell you what happened when I sold mine. That's what the whole article that I wrote for you was based on, my own experience of selling my own business, correct? So you start off when you're okay, I am really going to take my business to market. And you got to keep everything confidential, correct? You can't tell your employees, you can't tell your customers, you can't tell anybody, right? And there's huge guilt. Okay, that is a predominant emotion, because you're in a staff meeting and you're talking about the future, and you're talking about all these things, renewing insurance for the next 12 months, and you're keeping this inside of you. Okay, so you almost feel like you're kind of leading a double life almost, there's a lot of things you can't say. There's a lot of guilt when you take it out to the market in the beginning, correct? So then you kind of get a little bit used to it, right? You learn to manage it. It never goes away. You learn to manage the whole process. Then you kind of get to a buyer, you start talking about buyers to the buyers. And the questions that they ask you, hey, how did you start the business? How did you go from 0 to 60? And it's amazing when you start talking about it, you get pumped again. You're right. And then you start getting seller's remorse. Oh my gosh. You go back to your first days of starting it, right? So those emotions start to come in. Like your baby, right? So then you get an offer on the business, correct? And you get into the due diligence phase. That's when you start talking in different languages. Sure. Okay? Yeah. The emotions there are highly frustrating, because they're really asking probing questions about your business. And they should, if they're going to pay a lot of money for your business. But it's exhausting, okay? I mean, it's a lot of work. And a lot of frustration because you're repeating the same thing over and over and over again. So you get through the due diligence, you get to the closing call, and it's very anticlimactical, correct? And let me tell you how it goes. You have both attorneys on a call. You'll be on a call with the seller and the buyer. And one attorney will say, hey, I have all the papers, I'm ready to release it. And then the attorney goes, yep, I concur, I'm ready to release it. And then it's like, hey, everybody, congratulations. And that's it. I mean, it's literally 5 minutes. And when I sold my business, I did that. And you just sit in the office and you're like, is that it? So yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the closing call. And then the next 90 days or so, your emotions, you kind of know you've sold your business, things are different, but your day-to-day life hasn't changed yet, because you're still going through the transition. You're helping the buyer get their feet in the door and kind of get planted. It really hits you 3 to 4 months out. Okay, when you're not getting the calls and you don't have to do the performance reviews. That's when it really hits you. So there's a whole range of emotions, right? And it really helps to have a partner that's been through that journey before, that can kind of help you and guide you through that entire process.
Do you find that there are any emotions that are especially surprising to owners where they get into the process like, no, I'm going to be fine. And then you get to a certain stage and you're like, I did not see that emotion coming.
Correct. Oh, it happens all the time. Guilt. Okay, because of the confidentiality.
Okay.
It's a huge one.
They're so excited. They're like, oh.
But you can't tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you got to manage it, because otherwise it can overtake the entire process, and you don't think logically to get the best outcomes.
Okay.
Correct? And that's when a good firm that's representing you can really help you kind of be that buffer, because it's an emotionally charged journey no matter what.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a great tee up to an episode that is coming on when to tell your team, how you tell your team, and what that conversation looks like.
Yep, absolutely.
Welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. Today, we're talking about something that I have had a lot of sellers talk to me about when I've done podcasts and stuff with them and had conversations with them, and it's the due diligence phase. And I think you have some good analogies for how it can feel or should feel or won't feel or whatever. So let's start with that. What is due diligence like when you are selling your restoration company?
Yeah, sure. So let's demystify it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So listen, you're going to get an offer on your business, a letter of intent. It's going to have some broad brushstrokes on what people are going to offer for your business and the terms. And you like it, we sign it. Then usually buyers are going to want about 45 days to 60 days to kind of look under the hood of your company and make sure that everything is as advertised. That's what due diligence is. So here are the players. Okay. Usually you'll have a CPA firm, or a firm that does a quality of earnings on one side. And then you need to have your team on the other side. If you have a CFO, you got a bookkeeper, you got someone to help you on this side. So you got two teams, okay? And they're going to ask you, about 120 questions on the average. That's what due diligence is, right? And you're going to turn over all the documents that they ask you, okay? And it goes about 60 days, and it's no holds barred. They're going to ask you any questions they want, when they want it, and usually these are about an hour and a half to 2 hour calls 2 times a week. And it goes. Okay, that's what due diligence is. Okay. So at a really high level, without getting technical on it, it's just people looking under the hood and making sure that your business is as advertised. So why is there so much talk about it? Correct?
Yes.
So if you're not ready for it, and if you haven't prepared for the due diligence, and you got to produce all of these 120 documents on the fly, yes, it's like a root canal.
Super fun.
Super fun. You understand where I'm coming at?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. But if you've taken 3 months or 4 months and gotten ready without a buyer in front of you and added that pressure of it, and you did everything in and you got packages ready, you got everything ready to go, it's a little easier to do it, right? Yeah. So most of the folks get so bent out of shape about it, or it kind of gets them by surprise because they're not prepared for it. Yep. And all of a sudden, they got to produce all these documents and they don't know where it is. They don't have the team. They're answering questions on the fly. That's when these things get a little chaotic from a seller's standpoint. Yep. And here's also what happens. Due diligence is all about checking out what's under the hood, but it's equally confidence from a buyer's point of view. Okay. You understand? Yep. So buyers don't know your business the way you do. They're not living in it. So the only way they're going to know and have the confidence to write you a big check at closing is ask a lot of questions. Yeah. And if you're prepared to answer them quickly and efficiently, then the confidence on the buyer side grows quickly. Yep. And those questions start getting less and less, okay, as you go on. But let's say they ask you 5 questions and you had answers to 2 and not 3, 4, and 5. Mm-hmm. Okay, then doubt comes in the buyer standpoint. Oh, is it really what it is? They said it's this, but is it the other kind? Then they ask more questions and they ask more questions. And that's when you get into that rut on due diligence. So the key to it is really to take the time before and have somebody that's been through this process help you prepare for it. And you really need a team to prepare you for it. Okay. It's not a one-person activity. Okay,
Does not sound like
it's not. You need a team. There's a methodology, to it. There's a strategy to it, and once you get all that ready, then you can get through it a lot faster.
So how many companies make it from the letter of intent through due diligence to final sale?
About 40%.
Okay. And does it
Who are not ready. Okay, so if you're going it on the fly, about 40% go from letter of intent to close.
Okay.
Correct? But here's the difference. If you prepare for it, you can almost be at 100%. Okay, at our firm, we're at 100% over the last 14 years from LOI to close. But we work with our clients for almost 6 months in getting the business ready. So you don't have to go to our firm. The point of this is you got to be ready, and you got to know what to be ready for. Sure. Then if you're doing that, then you're ready for it when the time comes. You can get through it a lot faster.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Gokul. Good advice.
Absolutely.
See you soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Restoration Masterclass on M&A. So we've talked a lot about the different steps and what all of the buying and selling kind of looks like, but I want to take a journey through the overall selling process, kind of have you give sellers this overview, a broad view of what that looks like. So what does that look like from start to finish?
Yeah, great question, right? So it's a very complicated process from when you get an offer to when you go to close, right? And there's a lot of things you're signing up for. And you're signing on, okay, and you're agreeing to, all right? So, you start with the letter of intent, okay, and those are just high brushstrokes of what the terms would look like. A buyer will present that to you. There's usually around 12 to 15 clauses in it, okay? But there's 3 or 4 clauses in there that you really got to be aware for. Reps and warranties, terms, whether you have earnouts for, that you really got to know what you're looking for there, because you're agreeing to it. Yeah. Yes? Yes. Okay. Once you get through the letter of intent, okay, then you're going to go through a due diligence phase. And that, like I said, was about 60 days. And, in my previous video, we talked in detail about it. But again, it takes months to prepare for it. Usually they're going to ask you about 120 documents that you got to prepare. And you got CPAs on both sides going back and forth. And they're going to check out and make sure the business is what you advertised as for, right? Then as you're doing the due diligence, you're going to be hammering out the purchase agreement. Okay, so the purchase agreement, usually will have about 60, 62 clauses in it. Okay, most of them are pretty standard, but there's probably going to be about 4 to 5 clauses that really mean a lot to a seller on the risk. Okay, so you got to know what it is. Your reps and warranties, what kind of insurance, how you're going to get paid off for an earnout, how is the EBITDA number calculated, how is working capital calculated? These are kind of like our top 5. So it really helps to have someone on your team that knows the lay of the land when it comes to what you're agreeing to on a purchase agreement. Once you get to the purchase agreement, you're going to now have to come up with a communications plan. So how do you talk to your key employees? Okay, how do you talk to the general employees? How are you going to announce it? Okay, how are we going to communicate the story? Why is this particular buyer really good for your business? Okay, how is it going to affect your employees? Because you want it to be positive. And then how are you going to communicate it to the TPAs? How are you going to communicate it to your customers? So these are the entire communication plans that we go. And we have a communications person on staff that help our clients do this. That's how important this is. Okay, so once we get through some of that and we put a timetable in place, then we'll set up a closing date. Okay, and the closing call and the closing date takes about 5 minutes. You got attorneys on both sides will just say, hey, I got all my documents, we're ready to close. And then the seller's attorney will say, hey, I got all the documents, we're ready to close. And then you go to close. It's very anticlimactical. But going from an LOI to a close, okay, is a lot of process. And do you know, in general, only 40% of companies go from an LOI to a close? So you got to know where the pitfalls are. You got to know what's around the corner. You got to be able to avoid it. And you just take it one step at a time. And the whole process, should take you somewhere about 4 months, okay, to go from an LOI to a close. So that's what you got. You got about a 4-month process. So
from the seller standpoint, are there any red flags that I know that you've talked about that there's going to be a lot of preparation before the LOI is there, before you go into the due diligence and all of that. But what are some red flags that could come up that might hamper the process after you get the LOI and you're heading to close?
Yeah, great question, right? So when we go to conferences, everyone talks about multiples of companies. And to me, that's like an oversimplistic way of talking about outcomes on a deal. I mean, there's 62 clauses you're agreeing to, and price is one of them. You know what? So there's a lot of pitfalls that comes in there. I think risk. I think you need to understand risk. Okay, your reps, your warranties, what you're saying about your company. Are there any lawsuits out there? Those are the things that we look for in our client, because the price is the price. But how do you get the terms? That's where you get the peace of mind. Okay. Does that make sense? So you got the price and the terms. Okay, so a great price with not so great terms is ultimately a negative income for the client. Okay, sure. Make sense? Yep. Okay, a good price with great terms is a better outcome for the clients, and that's what we need to talk about, is the terms of the contract. And to do that, you need a team. You need a team of professionals around you that can help you negotiate and look out for what they are and get you to the finish line.
Perfect. All right. Well, you just teed up several of our final episodes coming up. We're going to be talking about ownership transition, what that looks like, and we're going to be talking about using a broker or somebody outside the industry. So, Gokul, thank you. See you soon. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass on M&A. So today we're talking about something else that a lot of buyers have had or sellers, have had a lot of different experience with, and that is the ownership transition. When are you telling your key people? When are you making a communication plan? In one of our other episodes, you talked about how many people you have to notify, which I hadn't realized before. When you talked about beyond employees, it's the TPAs, your other customers. There are so many people that need to know this news. So where do you start with the communication plan, and when do you start putting that in place?
Great question, right? So in our previous episode, we talked about the emotions of selling a business. Okay, other than putting it on the market, which is highly emotional, what we find, and even I find when I sold my company, is how do I tell my employees? I mean, I lost more sleep over that one question than pretty much everything else in the process. Because, the price, the terms, those were getting negotiated, so they were moving along the process, right? But the one with the employees, it usually happens a little bit later in the process. Okay, so once we get through the due diligence phase, that's usually when you bring the key employees into the game and you'll introduce them to the buyer, right? So that's when we do it, okay? And I can tell you that most entrepreneurs care for their employees, and this is, they have more sleepless nights on how to and when to tell the employees than any other thing in the process, right? So here's how we do it, right? So when we get through due diligence, when we're about 75% done through it, we will start talking about a communications plan, correct? And that would include, who your key employees are, who your key customers are, because you got to communicate that to them, right? Your TPAs, right? Your leadership roles, right? And all your other partners, your CPAs, your bankers, all, leasing folks, insurance and all of that. So you got 5 big buckets of communication. And the communication is, you first have to have a vision for the merger. You say, hey, why is this a good thing for the company? And then you take that to each one of these groups and you have to tailor that message. And you say, well, when you talk to the employees, you got to talk about why would it be good for them? Okay, and how they may have better opportunities for their families in the future. And you go to the customer and you say, okay, this is why this is good for you. So there's this whole plan that happens. And usually it happens, when we're about 50 to 75% into due diligence, we'll start talking about communication. And there's a lot of meetings that goes on between our communications folks and the communication folks on the other side. We start crafting this message together. And then what we would do, with our clients is we will actually do a dry run. Okay, because it's so emotional. You know what I mean? We will actually do a couple of dry runs. So all the talking points are hammered out and we can convey this message in a very clear, simple, and we can articulate it really, really well, right? And then we'll start going to all of the stakeholders, okay? So it is a whole discipline. It takes, a good 30 days from start to finish to do. Okay, and it starts when we're about 75% done at due diligence. So it starts, about 30 days before closing is when we would start. but you got to craft it, and it goes through different revisions, and then you got to practice it, and then you dry run it, and then you would execute on it.
So when are you executing on it? Let's talk about the employee side. Like let's talk about that first. When are you telling your team?
You know, here's what we found to be the best. Okay, so most key people on your team know that maybe it's time for a change already. So it's not as drastic as what people think it is, you know. Okay, so I think especially the key employees, once the due diligence is starting to kind of get some momentum, I think the earlier you bring them into the fold, the easier it is. Okay, the later you wait, the harder it becomes. Okay, so if you can almost get them involved in the process early on in the game, okay, it becomes easier for everybody. And even their stress levels, because they get to know the buyers, they've already started to have conversations with the buyers. Maybe they've met them for a dinner or a lunch or, you know, an offsite meeting. You know, that's the way. It's counterintuitive, right? Most owners would say, hey, I don't want to tell anybody until we're absolutely sure we're going to go to close. Okay, that hasn't worked well from all the data that we're seeing. Okay, what we know is once we have a likely chance that the deal is going to close and the due diligence is starting to get momentum, we then try to advise our clients to bring at least the key people into the process early in the game, so they get involved. The sooner they get to know the buyers, the easier it is going to be. So it's counterintuitive on when you're going to talk to your key folks. Now beyond the core team, announcing it to the general public or to the general employee population, right? We could do that at the day of closing. That's okay. But I think it's highly critical, and it works much better from our experience, to bring the key folks earlier on, as early as possible, into the process.
Is there a time that's too early in the process to let them know? Or have you been in a situation where it's gotten out to the entire company and maybe had a negative effect?
You know, if you got to get in front of it. Okay, you always have to be in front of it. Okay, so some entrepreneurs and some of our clients actually bring in the key employees and actually selecting the buyer. Okay, so if they have 3 or 4 buyers, they will actually bring in the key employees and say, hey, you guys are going to live with them post-closing. Why don't we bring you involved in it? To me, that actually works out the best. Because they're involved, they got a stake, they got a, you know, they're involved in selecting a buyer, and then they get on board quicker into the game. And it's easier to do that. All right, so if I had a preference, that would be the preference. Okay, bring them in as early as possible. Most of the time, the entrepreneurs are pretty comfortable. You know, maybe right around due diligence, they kind of see, okay, everything's going well, let's bring them in. But I would advise the sooner the better.
Okay. All right.
Totally counterintuitive, but the sooner the better. Yes.
Okay, yes. So this actually brought up an unrelated question to this conversation, but it's something we haven't talked about, and I think it's kind of interesting. How many companies are posting their company for sale versus being what, like in recruiting, we would call it a passive candidate, right? Where we're approaching them, they're getting approached by a company to buy. So how many companies are being listed for sale right now versus being approached and they're selling once they're approached? Yeah,
sure. So, you know, in our industry right now, everybody's getting phone calls.
Yes.
Right? Everybody's getting phone calls. Yes. So there's good and bad, right? As in anything, correct? So the good thing is, how do you know the game plan, and how do you know strategically, you know, whether it's a good fit or not, correct? And how do you select the best suitors? Yes. You know, who would be really great for your company? You know, so everybody's got their own way of making decisions. But let me tell you what we do at our firm. Okay, we know all the buyers in the marketplace. We know strategically what they're looking for. Culturally, we've visited their headquarters. We've talked to the CEOs. We know what their 3-year, 5-year, 7-year vision is for their firm, correct? And when we bring on clients, you know, at some point, very quickly, it gets beyond dollars and cents. It's all about fit, cultural fit, strategic fit, business fit, employee fit. And we make all of those decisions, and then we approach who would be best suited for our clients, correct? And that's what I would encourage anybody to do is, you know, the numbers are going to take care of themselves, right? And the more successful a business is, the less concerned they are about numbers. Okay, it becomes all about the people, It becomes all about the strategic fit. It becomes all about how can we give the folks better opportunities to grow and advance their career. Yep. And those are the things you need to know about a particular buyer. You got to know what their culture is. You got to know what they're looking for in an acquisition. You got to know how you fit into the overall master plan. Okay, so these are the things that become even more important. So you kind of start with money and, oh, I want a number, or I want to exit at this level. But let me tell you, from doing this hundreds of times, it quickly gets way beyond that. Yep. Okay, and then eventually the really great entrepreneurs focus on fit, people. I want to take care of my customers. Who's going to best take care of my key employees? You know, that's really where the focus should be.
Perfect. All right, great information. And I think on our next video, we need to dive into what to do when you have multiple suitors and how you're picking the best company.
That's a good one.
Perfect. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. So there have been a lot of deals in the industry lately, and a lot with big companies. And I know a lot of these big companies have had multiple suitors at the table. So what do you do when you have multiple suitors? And they're good suitors. I know that a lot of these have been good suitors for good companies. So how can an owner go about making the best decision for their company?
Yeah, great question, right? So all owners are getting calls today. So how do you make the best, right? And here's what happens. You're going to get multiple offers on your business, almost sight unseen, because they want to take it off the market. All right. So you're going to see these numbers kind of come in pretty close to each other as we do it. But I think it quickly moves beyond the numbers to strategic fit. So you got to know what the 3-year, 5-year, long-term strategic plan is for all the people that are approaching you. You got to really understand their culture. Okay, you got to talk to the people that they acquired before to see what the experience has been. Correct? And you got to understand and have a clear vision of how that acquisition, or if that, when you choose that particular person to buy your business, how together you could be better than alone. Correct? Yes. So it's all of these other strategic and cultural and leadership fits that you got to decide, right? Yep. Now, I can tell you at our firm, we go visit all the major players. We know what their plans are. We know culturally whether a particular client would be a fit or not a fit. Okay. So we spend a ton of time really getting to understand who these buyers are, whether it's private equity, whether it's a player that's getting national, or whether it's a family office. So it's our job to do it. So I think if you're getting multiple offers, that's what you got to do. You really got to sit back and do your research. You got to know, because everybody's in a honeymoon phase in the beginning, okay? And they're just going to throw all these numbers out and be extra nice and congratulate you and try to flatter you. But that's the game. But you got to go beyond that, all right, quickly. And you got to say, okay, who long term, once all the band has stopped playing, who down the road is going to be a strategic fit and better for my employees and for my customers? That's what you got to look at.
So how many of the companies that you work with have been through the due diligence phase, they're getting to the end, and there's maybe multiple suitors with multiple offers? How many of them are taking actually what's the highest number offer?
So it always starts with the highest number, right? Because that's where most of the entrepreneurs, but the really good entrepreneurs quickly get beyond that, all right? And then they'll start doing research and they'll start thinking about it. Okay, now who's good for my key people? Or who's good for my customers? Who's good for my employees? Who's good for the company that I've spent all these years building? How can they accelerate my growth? That's where you want to get to, right? It starts with numbers, but it quickly fades, okay? And usually it starts to, kind of center around employees and strategically who's the best fit is. And that's really where you want to be.
Do you have any questions that you think every single buyer should be asking every single seller should be asking every single potential buyer?
I think, why would you want to buy us? I think it's a great question. Yep. Very insightful. Okay. Second is, in your minds, what would make a successful acquisition? Okay. Those two questions are absolutely critical. And then you ask, hey, what is your end game? Right? So if you are, for example, you're young and you want to continue to work, right? Then maybe a private equity company that's going to buy you, and then maybe you have some special invitation to buy stock, in the mothership, so to speak. Maybe that is an option for you. If you want to retire early, then it may be another kind of buyer. correct? So it just also all comes back to what success means to you and what your vision is for an exit. And then you take a buyer and try to make the best match. That's the best way to do it.
Okay, so talking about the exit really quick, how many sellers are staying in with their company and maybe changing roles versus some leaving altogether? Or maybe there's that middle ground where they're a consultant for a while and then leaving. What does that generally look like?
So that runs the gamut. Okay, and again, it's an individual choice, correct? So some people say, you know what, I want to continue to work for another 2 to 3 years. I just want to cash out on my equity, correct? So we can negotiate that as part of the deal, right? Some folks would say, hey, I want to retire. And usually a buyer is going to ask you for 6 months to 12 months to help with the transition before you retire, right? So it kind of runs from, hey, I want to work multiple years, right, and help you grow and maybe get a second bite of the apple, to, hey, I want to retire, that's why I'm selling. Let me help you with a 6-month transition or a 1 year, and then I'm going to announce my retirement, right? So it works the gamut.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Gokul. Good information as always. See you soon.
Thanks.
Welcome to the grand finale of the Restoration Masterclass on M&A. So in this episode, I want to talk a little bit about using a broker versus not using a broker, and kind of we're going to wade further into the conversation, but let's start there. You're thinking about selling your company, and you could maybe go it alone, or you could maybe use a broker. Which way would you recommend people go?
Well, I don't want to be biased here, but
You're going to be no matter what, but go for it.
But yeah, I know, I get it. Listen, it's a personal choice, but here's what I can tell you is, it's a long journey and it's a complicated journey. And whether it's us or any other representation, it helps to have someone on your team that has been through it. Not only through it from an experience standpoint, but it can also negotiate, okay, and get you the best outcomes. Okay, well, that's what we find. Okay, we find consistently that we can get 15 to 20% better outcomes as far as price, but also as far as terms for our clients, just because we've been through it and we got a pulse on the market of what's going on, right? And that's what any representation should be able to do for you.
All right, so taking that a step further. So now, all right, you've decided you're going to sell with a broker, you're going to use a broker, but you can go with one outside the industry who maybe has some experience selling businesses before, and you can go with somebody inside the industry. What can be the value of finding somebody in the industry that knows restoration?
Yeah, sure. So there's good professionals everywhere, okay? But let me tell you why I specialize in restoration for my firm, and we've been doing it for almost 15 years now, correct? So what we found early in the game, back in 2007, 8, okay, that we could not go sell Mary's Muffin Shop one day and then go represent, a restoration company and explain what a TPA is to a buyer, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, and talk about mitigation versus construction. Yeah. So we found that the best value that we can bring and the best outcomes that we can bring for our clients is to specialize and really understand and be part of the industry. Otherwise, it gets really difficult from our perspective, okay, to really talk up your business, okay, to a potential buyer. And what do you look for? How do you explain things, right? So that's the reason why we did it, and it's worked out well for us. And I think that's what you're looking for, right? You're looking for someone that knows your industry, that knows your company, that can talk the language, and can really represent you, and put your best foot forward.
So as a seller, we talked about in a previous episode what you should ask a potential buyer. But as a seller, what should I be asking you or another potential broker as I'm trying to make the decision?
Okay, so that's a great question, correct? So it's a very simple answer, actually. Okay, there's only a couple of questions you got to ask you. One is, do you understand the restoration business and how well can you represent it, right? Can you talk the lingo? Correct? And the second is, what is your sell-through rate? In the sense, out of all the clients you've taken over the last 10 years or so, how many have you actually taken to the finish line? That one question will tell you pretty much everything you need to know, okay, about a firm and what a good fit they're going to be for you. Yeah?
All right, Gokul, we've touched on a ton during this entire series. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to throw out here before we wrap this up?
Oh my gosh, we've gone through so much. So I won't bore your audience with even more, but I want to say thank you. Okay, for coming out and helping us do this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for letting me be part of it. It's been a blast.
Yeah, let's do it again soon.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us for this Restoration Masterclass series on M&A. If you have any more questions on anything Gokul and I have discussed, please feel free to reach out to Gokul with your questions. His email is gokul@rbasells.com. You can also reach out to me. My email is michelle@c&rmagazine.com. I also wanted to take a moment to point you toward Gokul's 2021 M&A State of the Industry report that was published in C&R in late 2021. You can download the report for free on cnrmagazine.com. Gokul, thank you so much for joining me for this Restoration Masterclass series. It really has been a blast.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us.